in mind that Europe is experimenting with this, kind of new EU model of citizenship as a continent rather than, a bunch of tiny little countries that, didn't make a lot of sense at the time. And the EU turned out to be very successful in terms of particularly combating terrorism, where they've been able to share intelligence, get, intelligence from the ground and provide it to each other and help prevent some of these attacks. Like the good thing is these are rare. But it's a reminder that we need to go by the old adage of if you see something, say something. A lot of these attacks are stopped by ordinary citizens seeing something and reporting it to their local authorities or the FBI tip line or wherever country you're in. And that's critical because we've got to universally, as a country and as a people, condemn terrorism in all forms, no matter how it's inspired. And we don't quite yet know the exact details of what inspired this attack. And so I don't want to get into motives here, but what I do know is that if the modern free world leads the fight against terrorism and we come together, if we can at least come together on that around the holidays, then it's a good holiday season.
I agree with you, and I think that everyone would, because, I mean, if we can't all come together and be common sense about protecting innocent lives, then we need to build a new bridge. In August of 2024, just this year, there was that mass stabbing that took place in Germany. I just had one follow-up, Brad, because a lot of times it seems as though within conversations had with Democrats that there has been a diminishing of these kinds of situations, that perhaps even broaching the topic of where a person came from and what their motive could be related to their own religion or their own ideology is perhaps xenophobic. Do you think that we need to actually stop having that word thrown around so loosely when we approach people who are thinking of violence in this way?
No, I think religious motivation behind terrorism is certainly a topic that we need to address as a global citizenry. And I think, most, if not all but a small slither of Muslims around the world are peaceful, loving people. And so it's just as much onus on our Muslim community to condemn those who use, Islam in the name of terror, just as it is in the Christian side when people use Christian ideology to, attack or fund the KKK or found the KKK. And so this is, again, I come back to, this is just universal. We've got to get it to the root of these things, because if we don't, the lone wolf is the hardest thing in the world for law enforcement to see coming, because there's no communication, there's often no times or any signs. And so these lone wolf attacks are really scary. And thank God in Europe, they don't have the availability of guns that we have here in the US, or you'd see a lot more of these, I think. Like you can kill far fewer people with a knife attack than you can with an AR-15.
Yeah, it's just watching Europe, watching the rise in calls for violence, even if they're not actually executed at the time, is disconcerting for a lot of people watching. One last question for you, Matt. The note on the far right, I wanted to address that because it's increasingly been used to describe the most vile criminals, not necessarily just in this case. I'm talking about if you look at the history of that term being used, in the same breath it's used to describe some people who have more conservative values. And again, you can be very far right, way off a cliff, just like you can be far left off a cliff. But do we need to change this language, do you think, Matt?
I would say yes, Adrienne. Look, at this point, painting with such a broad brush isn't helping anybody out. What we need to do, as Brad said, is get to the root of the problem. But one of the things I disagree with Brad on is that the police did actually know about this guy. The police were aware, and unfortunately, he was able to perpetrate this attack. And more we're seeing this happen. So I do think there's something that law enforcement needs to get over, some political correctness or whatever the problem is that they're having, where they're allowing these people to get away with these attacks when they were already flagged. I mean, look at the Boston bombers. The FBI knew about them long before the attack, and somehow they were still able to do it. So what I want to focus on is making sure there are people around the Christmas tree or around menorah this holiday season. There's a lot of people that died because of the failures of those law enforcement agencies when they knew something was wrong with somebody. And if they were under surveillance, I just don't understand for the life of me how they're able to perpetrate these attacks with the Boston bombers, what they were able to do. And there's unfortunately just a long list of these missed opportunities not to have this tragedy.
Yeah, it seems as though there are always warnings. It's how much seriousness, how much weight is put on those warnings. Thanks so much for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's
fact-driven, unbiased coverage.